Kagan. Mr. Ribble, final words on this topic for 30 seconds.
I don't trust the government to not take the trust fund. They've invaded the trust fund for decades. And the government has a $1.4 trillion deficit from a year ago. And we have to remember that the fact of the matter is that we, you and I, the American people, are the government. And at the end of the day, I am as committed to protecting seniors as the doctor is. But he talks about telling the truth about Ribble. Well, I wish he would tell the truth about Ribble in the $200,000 ad campaign that he took out to smear me.
Thank you, Mr. Ribble. Final words from Mr. Kagan.
Well, to be perfectly fair, I'm going to quote Reed. Quote, "There's been a promise made, and for those that are in retirement years, you lived in place. Somehow we have to establish a phase-out of the current Social Security system to a new system. And that will have to happen over time. It could happen in a single generation. It'll probably require a fair amount of change in the retirement age," close quotes. There's a clear difference in this race. I will not personalize, privatize, or raise the age. Reed will.
Thank you, gentlemen. Michelle, I have a question this time first for Mr. Kagan.
Yes, thank you. And good evening. If you are re-elected to Congress, what are you going to do to get the deficit under control? And does your plan include cuts? And if so, could you be specific on where those cuts are?
Thank you very much, Michelle, for the question about something that's terribly important to me, to Reed's family, to everyone watching, to everyone back at home, whoever is looking on the internet. Debt and deficit are two different things. Let's talk about our debt. The best way for a nation to eliminate its debt is to grow our economy, putting people back to work. Everyone, including me, though, is angry about what happened to our economy. We know what happened. At the tail end of the last administration, when our financial system had a meltdown and our economy hit the tank, everyone out here on main streets across the country is being asked to pay for the mistakes of the gamblers and speculators on Wall Street. They gambled with other people's money and they lost. Now they're asking all of us to pay the price. Everyone, including me, should be angry about that. That is why I voted no to bailouts and yes to jobs. No to bailouts and yes to jobs was the right vote for my district. It was the best interest of everyone I have the honor of representing. Before we can move forward any further out of this ditch, never forget the policies that drove us into this. It was tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. It was deregulation of Wall Street. And it was going to war unnecessarily and spending $3 trillion overseas instead of investing here at home. We had 2 wars without paying a dime. 2 tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. A big handout, $400 billion worth to Big Pharma for Medicare Part D. Didn't pay a penny for that either. And then at the tail end of the administration, President Bush, their friends on Wall Street took out $1 trillion. In my view, it was fraud. It was stolen. So wherever I go in Northeast Wisconsin, people are giving me my marching orders. They say, "Dr. Kagan, we want our money back from Wall Street. We want our jobs back from China." I'll be happy to give you details about how we're going to be able to do that in my next 1 minute.
Well, I also want to ask you about your position on the tax cuts that went into effect during the previous administration. What's your position on those?
President Bush enacted 2 tax cuts, didn't pay for it. So that's part of our debt, the debt that Reed and I are both concerned about. Those tax cuts went to millionaires and billionaires. So what are we going to do at the end of this calendar year? What we need to do is make sure we have a permanent tax cut to the middle class, while simultaneously protecting Social Security from anyone who would seek to destroy it. We have to focus on the middle class. 63% of everyone in the middle class today is living check to check and week to week. 40% of people in the middle class have only saved up $10,000 or less for their possible retirement. So it is the middle class that needs help the most. It's the middle class that deserves our attention. We have to do everything we can in private small businesses to have access to the credit they need to grow our economy. We're going to make it in America. We're going to make it. We just need access to credit to work our way back into prosperity.
Same question for Mr. Ribble.
That's right, Mr. Ribble. If you were elected to Congress, first, what would you do to get the deficit under control? And if there are cuts, could you be specific in the areas that you would look at?
Sure. First of all, we stop spending. I mean, this is not rocket science, it's mathematics. And, I want to correct the Congressman. He said 4 years to fix this problem. When he went into office, the deficit spending he speaks of was $300 billion and going down. Today it's $1.4 trillion, and as far as I know, it's going up. But of course we don't know because our Congress didn't pass a budget as is constitutionally required. The national debt was under $10 trillion. Today it's $13.2 trillion. Unemployment, 4.6%. Today it's 9.6%. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives has control of the purse. They're the ones that decide whether we're going to spend or not spend. If all these tax cuts were so miraculous to fixing the debt, they've had 4 years to do that. The last 2 years, they've controlled the House and Senate and the White House. They could have done it then, but they were too busy spending our children's future over. As far as getting out of debt and getting things under control, you often get out of debt the same way you get in, incrementally, and you take it over time.
And let me also ask you your position on the tax cuts that went into effect during the previous administration.
Yeah, well, I think that in this case I agree with the Congress in that we don't raise taxes in a recession. I think it would be crippling to our economy. We talk about creating jobs. There's a reason that we've got 15.2 million Americans out of work, 8 million Americans underemployed. It's because the Congress has taken so much money out of the pockets of the job creators that they have no certainty of what's going on. They don't have certainty on what regulations are going to do. They don't know the costs of Obamacare. They don't know what Congress is going to do with taxes. They're going to continue to do what they're doing. Business, they will wait until they know for sure what the cost of that new employee is going to be. This is coming from someone who's got 30 years of business experience. You have a tendency to look at what government does and then you act cautiously. Just yesterday, a major manufacturer had to lay off 300 people in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, told me, I'm not hiring anybody because I believe our government is at war with me. And that's tragic.
Thank you, Mr. Ribble. Final words, first comments from Mr. Kagan.
Well, you just heard it. He's not going to raise taxes on the people he wants to represent, which is the millionaires and billionaires, people on Wall Street. He's not going to raise taxes. He's going to repeat the same losing policies of the President Bush's administration. There's no daylight between President Bush's policies and Reed Ribble's. He's going to give tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. He's going to deregulate business. And he's going to continue to allow corporations to take our jobs overseas by allowing them to gain the tax loophole benefit. I'm opposed to tax loopholes. I'm opposed to giving the millionaires and billionaires every cent we've got.
Thank you, Mr. Kagan. 30 seconds for final words from Mr. Ribble.
Let's just quickly clean up this Hoover myth about deregulation during the Bush years. That's a bunch of political gobbledygook. During President Bush's years, the Congress added, during his years with Republicans and Democrats alike, 78,000 pages per year on average of new regulations on this country. 78,000 pages per year and expanded government at the rate of 91,000 new employees. This whole thing about they're going to deregulate, it is just a bunch of misleading and false statements. It's just not true.
Thank you, gentlemen. Michelle, moving on to a new topic. First question now for Mr. Ribble.
The Affordable Health Care Act became law this past March, and you, of course, do not vote on this bill, but can you tell me your position on the Affordable Health Care Act and how you got there?
Yeah, I oppose the bill. This is a 2,700-page boondoggle that is going to add over 100 new federal bureaucracies, over 16,000 new federal IRS agents. It's going to require and mandate people to get into the healthcare system, even though they may choose not to. There's a lot of problems with healthcare, and our healthcare system needed reform. I want you to know I'm a small business owner. I offer health insurance and paid for health insurance for my employees, and I watched prices go up. And I didn't like it much then, but I'm going to like it a lot worse under this plan, because the prices are going to go up a lot higher, a lot faster. The Wall Street Journal alone just predicted a few weeks ago that healthcare costs in Wisconsin are going up 18% because of Obamacare. The president promised us that they would bend the cost curve, but they didn't address costs. Instead, they addressed coverage. And you can't fix costs by addressing coverage. You have to address costs by addressing costs. And that's what they should have done. There were so many things. I had so much hope that we could have gotten something really good for the American people here, really good for my employees. But we didn't. What we could have done is we could have addressed tort reform. And I'm not opposed to having someone, if they've been damaged by their physician, they'd be able to redress that grievance to the court system. But we could have addressed tort reform by saying, let's make a loser pay provision in the law, so that if there's a frivolous lawsuit, they could have fixed that. They could have allowed business owners and individuals to buy insurance across state lines and buy insurance from 1,300 different suppliers rather than the 9 or 10 that are here. They could have provided tax credits to doctors and nurses who provide care for free. They could have done those types of things. They could have addressed big pharma. They could have helped drive drug costs down. But instead, they made it a health insurance reform bill rather than a health care reform bill. And I think they could have done much, much better.
So you think there need to be changes. You talked about tort reform, you talked about some of them. If you're elected, can you tell me what some of the changes you'd be pushing for?
Sure, I would be pushing for some of those things because I believe that they'll actually bend the cost curve down. I think it's really important that we get at the heart of the matter. But stop and think about this. Healthcare is not, how do I want to say this? The laws of supply and demand apply to healthcare just like anything else. And so what we've accomplished here is shoving 31 million new patients into the system, shoving up demand. But we've done nothing on the supply side. And so costs must necessarily go up. And the other thing is, although there were a few things mentioned in Obamacare that would work toward health outcomes, they really did nothing to make Americans healthier. And then finally, they stripped $500 billion from Medicare. You talk about protecting seniors, it was exactly the wrong thing to do. And so there are lots of things that still need to be repaired in our healthcare system. And if you send me there, I'll get busy and do it.
For Mr. Kagan.
Well, thank you very much for asking about health care. I'm a physician. I have my entire adult lifetime, I've cared for many different adults and children, most especially our veterans, since 1973. I've seen what health care is when it's bad and underfunded, as it was in the 1970s for our Vietnam veterans. I worked very hard when I got to Congress to increase our funding for our veterans by 77% to guarantee they'll get the care they need when and where they need it. There are a great deal of myths about what this bill is, but I can tell you what's in it. I read it. I'm proud to say I helped to create it. I ran on a campaign slogan, "No patient left behind." I put the framework around this whole idea that there should be no discrimination in health care. No discrimination means that if you're a citizen, you should be in. And in this new law, as of the 23rd last month, you have 5 new American freedoms. Freedom from discrimination, freedom from cancellation, freedom from going broke just because your kid gets sick, like Charlie Knuth, freedom to choose your own doctor, and freedom to go to the closest emergency room whenever you'd like.
Now, you obviously supported this legislation. Do you think there need to be any changes to it? And if so, what those are?
Well, let me just say that I think I just got 1 minute on that instead of 2, but if I may, reclaim my minute. Well, I don't make the rules here. I make the rules in Congress. I play along with the rules. Let me clear up some of the mythology. The scare about Medicare Advantage was, oh, it's going to go away. No more Medicare Advantage. And what's the reality? Medicare Advantage costs went down by 1%, enrollment increased, and the benefits stayed the same. If Reid had taken the time to read the bill with his staff or with himself, he'd find out that you can get state compacts between state lines and buy health insurance coverage across state lines. There is a minor step forward in tort reform to look at some pilot studies like we've been doing here in Wisconsin. But the most important thing is we need transparency. I wrote a bill. It was 1 sentence. It says that any individual or business that offers healthcare products or services for sale to the public must at all times openly disclose all of their prices they've accepted as payment in full, including on the internet. I hope that Reid would join me in approving that sentence, which turned into 3 pages in legalese. When we have a transparent medical marketplace, there'll be competition to drive quality up and prices down, guaranteeing access to affordable care for all of us. I look forward to going back and fighting hard for that success.